Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thank you for joining us this week on Market Journal. This is our last show of August. Let's make it a good one. We're starting off the show today talking about silage, and in order to make good silage and reduce storage loss, sometimes a farmer needs a little help from inoculants. Now, this is a complex issue, but there are some things you can do to figure out if this is the best management practice for you. Extension's Brad Schick joined me to discuss what inoculants are and the role they play in corn silage.
Right. So inoculants are essentially bacterial cultures that assist in the fermentation process of silage. So they're naturally occurring, but we can also add some to the silage to make a better ensiling process, a better fermentation process. That's the long and the short of what inoculants are.
And Brad, how does one decide what type of inoculant to use?
Right, so there's a couple thoughts when you're thinking about an inoculant. The one thing is that it doesn't fix problems necessarily, but it can help fix some of the problems. When we think about it, you have to think if you're doing an upfront fermentation issue, that's where you need help, or you're needing more on the aerobic stability. So as you're potentially feeding out that silage, so after the process is complete. That means that there's different names for those. So we have our homolactic or our heterolactic bacteria inoculants, and those will determine whether or not what you choose for those issues, whether the aerobic stability, upfront fermentation, or really both.
So when a farmer inoculates corn silage, is there any benefit that can be passed on to the animal that's going to eat it?
There's kind of some mixed results when we talk about really whether or not there's a benefit to the animal. There's some data showing there might be for dairies, there might be some milk production increases, but really the data is kind of not sure on that right now. The biggest advantage would be there's less dry matter, or there's more dry matter available in terms of the producer, not necessarily for the animal themselves.
Okay, so say a farmer comes to you and says, I've decided that I want to inoculate my corn silage. Take us through that process.
So the first step would be considering whether or not you want to use it or not. If you have a perfect silage and it's a perfect year, some may consider not using an inoculant. You might decide to use it just as a kind of an insurance policy as well, and depending on which one you want. So like if you're thinking about those upfront fermentation, you want a little bit better or faster fermentation, you're looking at that like the homolactic. So that's the type of inoculant you'd want. If you're looking for that more aerobic stability, you're going to look at that heterolactic bacteria. So that's like your classic Lactobacillus buchneri. That would be the big name that everyone hears is L. buchneri would be the one. Another thing to consider is buying a good product of inoculant. When we think about the standard of inoculants, we talk about colony forming units or CFUs per gram of forage, fresh forage. So the standard is 100,000 CFUs per gram of forage. That's typically when we talk about our homolactic bacteria, and that's generally the industry standard.
And finally, I think it's important to hammer home that inoculants aren't a substitute for good management practices like a timely harvest and proper storage, right?
Right. You're putting up the silage at the right moisture, the correct moisture, packing it correctly, making sure that you're getting a really good pack and eliminating that oxygen. This is an anaerobic fermentation, so we need to get rid of that oxygen. Covering that silage is going to be important too. You're going to minimize your losses, so covering the plastic is going to reduce dry matter loss. Those are all situations, when we talk about damage, drought or hail, still need to make sure we're doing a good job of putting up the silage and checking moisture. Those are all things we just have to do on any given year, but inoculating any given year might be a good choice too, just looking at the benefits of using an inoculant with our corn silage.
If you need help in determining if inoculating corn silage is right for you and your farming operation, make sure to reach out to your local extension office. Moving on now, and for many, harvest is fast approaching, and you may be looking to lock in on some custom farming services such as harvesting corn or soybeans. And with that in mind, we wanted to take a moment to examine the 2020 Nebraska Farm Custom Rates Report. Market Journal's Bill Dodd recently caught up with Nebraska Extension Farm and Ranch Management Analyst Glennis McClure to break down the numbers.
The 2020 Nebraska Farm Custom Rates Report consists of data collected from agricultural custom operators and reflects current rates that may be levied for machine hire services and other work provided. Most notably of interest to many producers and custom farm providers are questions pertaining to fall operations such as harvesting and hauling. Upon inspection, it appears that rates are up across the board from the 2018 survey.
And so for 2020, we saw a general increase of between 3 and 7%, sort of in the tillage and the planting area. And harvest, again, was a little bit more gradual, but we did see an increase. And I really noticed, that the baling rates stay really steady over time, but yet they do have a slight increase. Harvesting is another really popular custom operation that our folks provide. So we do have rates on a flat charge per acre, and so combining small grains like your wheat and oats is about $34.38 on a state average per acre, and that was up about $3 from the 2018 report. Combining irrigated corn, a flat rate per acre, is at $39.34 per acre average for the state, and that was up about $1 from the 2018 report. We also asked for rates on flat, if there are charges on a flat rate per bushel, and for combining irrigated corn, it's 32 cents per bushel, and that was up 5 cents per bushel from the 2018 report. A lot of folks are interested in what the rate is for combining soybeans, and we don't ask for a dryland versus irrigated rate on that. But the combining soybean rate, flat rate per acre, is $37.29 on average for the state of Nebraska, and that was up about $2 from the 2018 report.
These rates are based on survey responses from custom operators. Since our state's agricultural industry has an abundance of diversity, rates for similar operations may vary greatly from one area to another. This could be due to a number of factors, such as how far an operator must travel for work or fuel costs, but there are some things the survey doesn't take into account, such as materials provided by the producer.
We ask operators to include the rate that they would charge to cover their power unit, their implement, their fuel, and their labor, and not to include input costs. For example, if they were doing a planting custom hire job, they wouldn't include the seed or the fertilizer that would go into that. That would be on the back of the farmer that hired them to do it. Now, for 2020, we asked our custom rates operators to provide to us what they were figuring for an average for diesel for 2020, and the average for the state was $2.12, and that was down from the 2018 report. So you would think prices would go down a little bit, or the rates would go down a little bit, but because of ownership costs and other factors, those rates did not generally go down, they went up.
Even with fuel prices down from the 2018 report, the cost of operation has continued to climb. For anyone who may be thinking about undertaking custom farming as a side job, Glennis laid out in detail several different factors you may want to keep in mind before offering a price that is suitable for your needs.
I suggest that, yes, you can use the custom rates report because it is the market rate report. It gives you an idea of sort of what the competition is and what folks are charging. But please keep in mind, operators need to cover their costs. And the operating costs would be your fuel and your labor and repairs on your machinery and any cost of supplies that might be provided, like twine for baling, that type of thing. Okay. In addition to operating costs, custom operators really need to think about their long-term, their ownership costs. That would include depreciation, interest on if they're paying interest, or even the opportunity interest of owning the machinery, the personal property taxes that they would pay on the machinery, housing for their equipment, and also insurance. So it's really important that as you're considering what rates to charge, you really need to consider all of your operating costs and your ownership costs, in addition to looking at the market rate survey that we provide in the custom rates survey report.
When it comes to making an informed decision when deciding what to charge or pay for your custom operations in Nebraska, the 2020 Custom Rates Report is a tool you won't want to be without. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. If you'd like more information on 2020 custom rates, we've included links to the full report and a complete webinar on the topic. That's all on the Market Journal website. Let's get a look at our markets now for the week, and according to the latest crop progress report, corn rated at 66% good to excellent with 96% at the dough stage and 60% dented, both well above average. Soybeans rated at 71% good to excellent with 98% setting pods, again, above average. DTN's Todd Hultman joined me this week to discuss crop conditions and what's making news in the markets, but I began by asking Todd about this month's DTN Digital Yield Tour and the goals behind it.
So this is a joint effort. DTN and the Progressive Farmer sponsored this tour, and we also worked in partnership with Grow Intelligence, which provides a satellite imagery service to us. So putting that all together, we came up with a digital or virtual yield tour, however you want to look at it, which seems suitable and appropriate for this year. We did it in the second week of August, and it turned out there were a lot of market-moving events happening that second week. But we also had a WASDE report on Wednesday, so we kind of coincided the tour with that. USDA this year, you know, they're not in the field yet in their August report anymore. They also use satellite imagery. So we were kind of comparing with what USDA was doing.
Any particular findings from this year that you'd like to share with the audience?
I'd say overall we were close to USDA's August estimates. For corn, we were about 2 bushels higher at 183.9 bushels an acre. On soybeans, we were within, I think, 1 or 2 tenths of USDA's estimate. So overall, we tended to confirm what USDA saw at that time. But as we now know since then, the weather's turned a lot drier. Iowa had a big windstorm, so those estimates are going to change, obviously, when we come to the September WASDE report.
And yeah, Todd, let's look at everything that's been happening with these markets. So we're having this hot and dry weather through our area. You just mentioned the straight line winds that impacted Iowa. And, you know, to top all that off, we have Marco and Laura, 2 storms moving up to the Gulf, making landfall back to back in the U.S. What's the role all of this is playing in the markets right now?
Well, overall, I think the bottom line for the market is that those crop estimates we got from USDA in August, they're probably going to stand as the high water mark, is my best guess, because we've had significant hot and dry stretch, really kind of sapping crops since that time. And of course, as you know, this is an important pod filling time for soybeans, and even though the corn crop got a good solid early start, it's also hard on the corn crops here even late in the season. So it's been overall a tougher time for crops it's a bit unusual for this time of year. It's helped our price rebound a bit, and the 2 hurricanes or tropical storms you mentioned, Troy, it's the second one, Laura, is actually the one that's going to help bring a little bit of relief possibly to the central and eastern Midwest late this week. But it looks like the first Marco is not going to have a significant effect on our row crop production.
And with Laura, that's probably good because anxious time for soybean growers right now because the weather is so crucial getting those pods filled in.
Yes, absolutely. Critical time of the year, and we have not had the moisture they need. So it is very tougher on them.
Let's dive in a little bit more on soybeans. So we had you on the show back in late May. And one of the things we talked about is making sure U.S. soybean producers have access to that growing soybean market. And we've been seeing the news about soybean exports to China. What do you make of all this?
You know, it's been one of the best bullish surprises of this late season. And of course, this has been an extremely tough year for our corn and soybean producers. And the way coronavirus hit the market and really zapped a lot of demand that we were expecting this year. But just recently, we've seen very strong numbers on the new crop sales side for both corn and soybeans. We've got new crop soybean sales in excess of 800 million bushels already, and the new season hasn't even started yet, Troy. That's just an incredible start, something we don't often see, if ever. And that has really helped to revive a lot of hope for prices both in the corn and the soybean market. We also had news earlier on Tuesday morning that the U.S. and China are back at trade talks again. So that's a bit encouraging to go along with this. But overall, we see a very strong appetite coming from China, largely for soybeans, but also for corn this year as well. And that is really helping to resurrect prices from the bottom this year.
And let me get your thoughts on this. What are some things that farmers should be focusing on now as they try to unload that old crop or maybe sell some new crop?
Yeah, well, I don't have to tell them. It's been a very difficult time of year to market corn and soybeans. And our best seasonal opportunities, which usually come late spring, early summer, had the rug pulled out from under them with the coronavirus situation. Just now, we're starting to see a little more rally back in the markets. And I would say if you have not priced any new crop corn or soybeans yet, maybe take a look at this recent rally here and find yourself an opportunity to start at least on 25% of your production. But I would like to expect that once we get through a little harvest pressure when that starts, because we're probably going to still have some pretty big corn and soybean harvests, even though we've seen yields trimmed late in the season. I think once the corn and the beans get stored away for the season, we're probably going to see a little better price dynamic, and especially if China remains strong on the demand front once we get to about the end of December and January. So that's where I think we're going to probably get our better pricing opportunities in this very unusual year.
Thanks again to Todd for joining us this week. Next week, our analyst will be Elliot Dennis. We'll talk about the livestock market, so if you have a question that you'd like for me to ask him, make sure to email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. Next up, Bill Aug officially became the new executive director of the Nebraska State Fair on June 22nd. Now, Bill has managed a number of ag-related fairs and events throughout his career, most recently the Walla Walla Fair and Frontier Days. That's a regional event covering 6 counties in eastern Washington state and 1 county in Oregon. You can read about Bill's background and changes to this year's Nebraska State Fair in the August Nebraska Farmer. It's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. And Al, I thought last week was hot, but seems even hotter this week. How's the forecast looking as we head into September?
Yes, Troy, it's been very hot this last week. We've seen this all across the Midwest. In fact, we've seen the crop ratings the last 2 weeks decline, and I expect a really significant decline this next week with these temperatures anywhere from the mid-90s to the 105, 108 range out in the Panhandle on a couple of these instances in these very dry conditions. We've just plain run out of gas in a lot of the dryland environment for this crop, and we've seen these declines. The drought monitors expand the abnormal dryness pretty significantly. So the big question is, do we have any precipitation, and can we get rid of this heat? So let's go to the upper air models and see what we might have in store, particularly in the wetter environment that we might see in eastern Nebraska. As you can see from this morning's upper air chart, we have a trough over the Pacific Northwest. The ridge is starting to break down here across the center part of the country. We've got a little energy riding over top of that ridge, just not a lot of moisture to work with. And lots of that moisture was sucked up out of the atmosphere by Hurricane Laura, which is off the East Coast. So really the only residual moisture we have is expected to be across northern Kansas. But we have a trough coming in as we go into tomorrow, coming out of the northwest, and that does look like it's going to provide some ample lift across eastern Nebraska. Low pressure sets up in southeastern South Dakota. This is going to bring a pretty good shot of cool air into our region. Although we don't show any moisture Saturday or Sunday morning, the real action starts to begin as we get into Sunday night into Monday, as that trough starts to deepen and we get some energy on the backside of it coming into our region. High pressure at the surface is going to provide the perfect ingredient for a convergence zone, and we look like we'll see some thunderstorm activity across central and eastern Nebraska. Unfortunately, most of this will miss western Nebraska. On Tuesday, we do see a little bit of a moderation in temperatures ever so slightly, but we have another trough coming in from our northwest that's going to reinforce the cold air, and it'll move through as we get into Tuesday night and to Wednesday. The main precipitation with the first cold front moves off to the southeast, and now we see that next piece of energy coming in over the northern plains on Wednesday, bringing some energy into our region. Low pressure sits up over south central Kansas. That might provide enough lift to get a convergence across portions of Nebraska, but it looks like the main emphasis of precipitation is still going to remain off the eastern seaboard. Our real action starts to come on Thursday as more of that energy starts to dive down out of the northwest. See low pressure in Montana and eastern Wyoming as a focal point for that precipitation. High pressure to our east. On the backside, we'll start to push moisture up in the region. We'll start to see some precipitation breaking out in eastern Kansas, and some of that may move up into southeast and east central portions of Nebraska as we get into Friday. We get some low pressure again in southwest Texas at the surface. With that energy to our north, we do have that convergence zone, and wherever that sets up, we'll see that precipitation. Right now it's focusing on the southern portion of the state. We could see that back up a little bit, but more importantly, there is more energy coming down the pipeline, and we see below normal temperatures from next Thursday to the following Tuesday as another important wave starts to develop over the Memorial Day weekend and starts to lift into our region. That's going to increase our precipitation chances, especially the second half of next weekend. We see that above normal moisture over the eastern half of the state, below normal over the west, and it gets really cool as we get into about the 9th to 10th of the month with possible frost across the northern plains. So Troy, overall, we're going to start to see a cool down starting this weekend. Best chances of moisture will be Sunday night into Monday, and then we cool down midweek into the low 70s before we warm up next weekend, before we then cool down significantly.
Thanks, Al. Finally today, lower quality and lower yields. That's the big takeaway from the University of Nebraska's 2020 winter wheat variety tests. Researchers study 18 winter wheat locations across the state to gain a better understanding of the challenges Nebraska farmers face when growing wheat. Dryland cropping system specialist Cody Creech joined me to discuss this year's findings.
We came into it knowing that there needed to be a few changes that we thought would really improve the quality of the data and the reliability of the data. And the first thing that we did last year was we started to seed all the plots on a uniform basis. And so out west, all the dryland plots were seeded at 900,000 seeds per acre. And in the eastern part, everything went in at 1.2 million seeds per acre. And then the second thing that we've done that is really nice is we added an intensive management trial at the mead location and at the sitting location. And we call these kind of like this, they're sister trials. They're right next to another a variety trial. But in the intensive management trial, we are seeing what the wheat will do if we give it an extra push. So this year we added additional nitrogen. I think each location received an additional 30 pounds of nitrogen. And we also applied a fungicide to protect from any disease, particularly stripe rust.
And growers have had some pretty strong wheat harvests these last few years. How did this year's results stack up?
Yeah, so with the wheat, as you mentioned, in the last few years, we've had pretty good wheat growing weather with ample rainfall and pretty good weather. This last year, we definitely had some challenges. We are really dry out west. We are short rainfall right now, but we also had coming out of the winter, we had some extreme freeze events where it was so cold that the wheat had greened up, and then it looked like you went out and you sprayed it with glyphosate. It was just dead. But it recovered from that, but it definitely reduced the number of tillers that wheat had and reduced the yield.
And then we had a lot of heat in late June when that wheat's trying to flower. That heat was super hot. And when you have that hot weather, that really, again, it reduces yield, it reduces the test weight of the wheat. And we saw that reflected this year. So overall, yields were lower. We had a little bit lower quality as far as test weight, but the protein was higher compared to years past.
What are some of the top things that you'd like growers to take away from these wheat variety trials when they're making their decisions for next season?
Probably the number one thing is to think about the year-to-year variability. I mentioned how in previous years we had a lot of rainfall. This year it was drier. That's why it's so important to look at multi-year averages. The varieties that were doing really good the last couple of years with a lot of rainfall might not have been the ones that were doing good with this drier weather. And so expecting that we'll maybe stay dry for another few years, looking at those varieties that are going to do better under dry conditions is important. But really looking at those multi-year averages and saying what works well over multiple years and not necessarily just what did well this last year. The second thing would be to really look at the characteristics of the different wheat varieties, whether you need a wheat that is tall or short or has good standability, whether you're after a wheat that has good protein or disease resistance. All of those characteristics are there in the characteristics tables that we have published. And so looking at those specific characteristics on what a grower needs for their specific field or farm is important. So those are the two big things as a grower looks to select a variety for next year.
You can check out the results of this year's variety tests along with past years online. We've included that link on the Market Journal website. That's going to do it for this week's show. Remember, if you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.